Darkly Splendid Abodes, the official podcast of Toronto Thelema. Exploring, if you will, practical philosophy, from science and the workings of the mind to spirituality, esotericism, and magic. Stooping down, dipping my wings, I came into the darkly splendid abodes. In part 2 of our deep dip into Charles Stansfeld Jones' Liber 31, Michael and I continue our look at Frater Achad's discovery of the keyword to the Book of the Law, and his account of his attainment of the grade of Master of the Temple, and perhaps parts beyond. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Let's move to September 24th in 1918, Era Vulgaris, Anno 14 Solen Libra. And this chapter is titled The Record of Reflections in the Mind of OIV-VIO. I'm skipping down to the third paragraph here. I do not, even now, rashly wish to assume that I attained unto the grade of Ipsissimus, for I realize that anything I write regarding Kabbalistic proof thereof can only show that I understand the formula of that grade, and understanding is referred to 8.3, and appertains to the grade of the Master of the Temple, which office is admitted to me by... Ooh, man, this is a mess.
It's supposed to be Therian, but it's just the way that it comes out on the internet when we have these.
Use Greek.
Yeah.
Which office is admitted to me by Therion 9 = 2. Also, I understand that it may be that one may in a way attain unofficially without of necessarily holding office in any particular grade. I make no claim to 9.2, for Ophion claims that.
Oh, that's Therian.
No, it isn't. It's Ophion, but it means the same person.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I looked it up. There's a place in 1920 in Kefaloon when they're working on a dramatic ritual together, and Crowley calls himself Ophion in that too.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's some god. It's some Greek primordial god.
Oh.
But
I guess that's his. Okay.
But yeah,
news to me.
Yeah, I and no matter how many times I Googled it, only came up in two places. That one bit of ritual fragment, and then here as well. But I guess he was using it for a bit when he was at Kefaloon. And it's weird that he goes Therion to Ophion in
I guess
one paragraph.
I'm guessing maybe that was his title as a 9 = 2.
Maybe.
But yeah, I mean, like you say, it's like earlier. I mean, that could have been Ophion just didn't translate the first time because it ends the same way. But anyway.
I make no claim to 9 = 2, for Ophion claims that, and I have no wish to dispute his right to it, any more than he apparently wishes to dispute my right to 8.3. But with 10.1 it is different. There is no one living in the flesh, as far as I know, who claims that grade, and whosoever does, so it is a matter which concerneth God alone. So, more cattiness from Frater Achad, claiming without claiming.
And distinguishing between the idea of attaining to a particular place in terms of the experience of it versus holding an office of a particular level.
Mm-hmm. And now I'm trying to figure out here when things occur, because we're going to have some actual record of some actual of some sort of visionary work that Achad does, perhaps some visionary work, or perhaps just breaks during some meditation sessions that are happening around this time. He's saying, the actual experience of which I write, which is summed up in the word of my grade, took place in December of 1917. So that's a year after this event that he calls the initiation. Well, let's say 6 months, a year and a bit.
I think he calls it 18 months because it's like June 22nd to December.
Yeah, so it's a little bit after. What he says is his initiation. So this that's happening here is not, I don't think, his abyss crossing experience, unless I've really misread the last sort of chapter. But let's see where we can read from. Here, first regarding the experience of that being we call OIVVIO, there arose in his consciousness a state unlike the normal, and which be description might appear like madness. The path of Aleph is madness, since reason was destroyed and transcended. The air became his balance. The structure of his mind, which hitherto had been built up along Kabbalistic lines, was changed, and the house of God, as it were, was destroyed by the lightning flash, the opening of the eye of Shiva.
So it becomes very interesting. I think this is where it's like that episode that he went through seems to be at this time.
Yeah, but then he says, at this time he walked, talked, and performed all physical actions in a normal way. But all that took place wherever he went, whatever he said or heard, tasted or smelled, had value according to his mental state. So he doesn't think he's acting crazy. Mm-hmm. He just feels
But
crazy.
Then again, who does when they're...
Yeah. I know to you I seem perfectly lucid, but I actually feel quite mad.
I realize to you I appear completely lucid.
Yeah, that's something that...
that's something normal people say.
Sound like the Salvador Dali or something. I realize to you I must appear perfectly lucid. But to me...
Perfectly lucid. I like that enunciation.
But within the mind of Dali, he actually feels quite mad. All right. So, and this is what you were pointing at before. Now, he's sort of talking about gradually a solar sort of consciousness emerging in his mind. He feels as if he's been open to a gas and finally to a fire, and the aether, as before said, and which has become an eccentric system. This seemed to terminate one part of the initiation. He's talking about walking around on glass and seeing everything he's doing reflected as if like it's in a mirror, and he's not sure what side of the glass he's on. And this culminates here he says, we must now consider him as going about with a mind transformed into a solar consciousness. This lasted all day, during which he underwent many adventures and seemed to perform much magic. But on the evening the process continued, under extraordinary circumstances, to be recorded elsewhere. But be it said that he was in a place which appeared to him like unto a temple of initiation, especially prepared in every detail for the ceremony, and around him were officers exactly carrying out their appointed parts. Yet he was unwittingly in prison, surrounded by the scum of the earth, of which he has written. It never occurred to me to take that literally. I thought he just meant like he was on planet Earth, and seeing the machinery of the universe, the vision of the machinery of the universe, and everybody going about their appointed tasks, like, looking down from the Empire State Building and seeing like humanity as an ant colony, and it all seems like perfectly mechanistic, but in reality, this is a way station or a training ground or like a spiritual high school. Then you die and move on to the next place. I thought he was sort of pointing at something kind of Vedantic or something like that. But you're saying that he was literally in prison and literally surrounded by the scum of the earth.
It would seem so. It would appear so.
Of which he has written, when having become free, thou findest thyself in prison, yet knowest it not. When thy prison of freedom appeareth unto thee as the open road, when thou who hast longed for the company of the saints findest thyself among the scum of the earth, yet knowing it not, thinkest thyself in the company of all the Buddhas, and taketh thy place as the least of these in silence. when having sought and found gestures of magic power, thou findest thyself among the lewd and unclean, yet knowing it not, perceive in their common actions and supreme and perfect art of magic. Then, having sought for words of power, thou findest thyself in tune with the words of low men, knowing not that they speak aught but the highest truth. When having given all, thou art offered the cup of charity, yet thinking it to be the most abominable mixture of poison, thou drinketh it thankfully. When having rushed forward, thou findest thyself whirled backwards, yet knowing it not, thinkest thou art still. Then, it may be, thou hast comprehended wherein sorrow is joy, change is stability, and selflessness is self. There's an interesting turn here about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stanzas down, where in the first little bit he's saying, he thinks this is wonderful, but actually it's prison. He thinks it's and the prison appears as the open road, but still the illusion is the freedom is illusion, and really he's confined. But then down here, it becomes, when having sought words of power, thou findest thyself with words of low men, knowing not that they speak aught but the highest truth. So there's a second layer of illusion that comes out, where he thinks he's in a high place, actually he's in a low place, and in that low place, people are trying to be vulgar, but what's coming out is has veiled beneath it, something pure. And so you're actually given a cup of charity, and you are happy that you've been given poison, and you drink it and try to kill yourself. You're grateful, but it really is the cup of charity. So there's a double veil that starts to come up in the last third of this poem, which vindicates it, because for most of the time it seems like the same turn is happening in each stanza. It's the same thing repeated about 4 or 5 times, and it starts to get you're hoping that it's going to kind of innovate, and when it finally does, the innovation it's not a different kind of turn. It's a deepening of the original turn, which I found surprising. Is there anything you want to say at this point?
From the outside looking at him, I'm sure at the time, obviously it sounds like people understood him to be going through a mental break, or to be faking a mental break in order to avoid the draft. That seems to be the case, but it's clearly he's describing it from his point of view. He was in this deep initiation. And everything he talks about in this paper, like when he's talking about the experiences themselves, there's not really, it's not like it's in he's not like in a specific controlled ceremonial situation. He's not in like a meditative state per se, like in the sense of being, in a room isolated from the world and that sort of thing. It's him in the world and going through these things as he's moving through life. And that's what it seems to be.
We know that he can do disciplined practice, because the Master of the Temple paper that's excerpt from his diaries shows examples of disciplined practice from him, and he gets pretty good results from them. And then the Zealotry task that Crowley sets for him, Crowley says, this is more difficult than the task I would usually set for people, but this guy's really good, so I want to give him something that he will have to rise to. And so I kind of can't tell whether he's doing, whether he's keeping resh, whether he's doing his composing himself to an hour or so of holy meditation each day after doing resh, and then describing the consequences of that experience, as he's out in the world, because one does start to feel quite loopy. I was doing all that Enochian stuff last year, and attitude of my writing changed, and the feeling of being, in conversation with other people changed. Sometimes when I've been doing radionics work, the same thing has happened. So I sort of take it to be that he's describing conscious processes that are inspired by magic, but maybe he didn't do anything except take the oath of the abyss and then just wander around, That's
the thing that does ring true of, like, I've had experiences like this where you're moving through life and you're undergoing these dramatic internal changes or these dramatic internal experiences, and even interacting with other people. Like, I've had situations where just at critical moments, there's a couple of points in time, years apart from each other, where I remember this sort of wandering fool showing up, which is to say, like, somebody who basically comes off as just some crackpot who comes up to me in the street or, at work or something like that, and rambling nonsense, but they just hit on the nose with a few sentences that it's just like, wait a second, that's weird. And so you just sort of have to, take it as, maybe I can glean something from this. But a lot of what he's talking about reminds me of some of these kinds of experiences as you're moving through life and feeling like you're undergoing something important, whereas from an objective observer, it would be completely, entirely trivial.
My stupidest example of this is when my son was born. We were in the hospital for a very long time.
What a stupid example.
And every sort of 12 hours, my wife sent me home to feed the cat for some reason. And the nurse kept looking at me like I was the worst person on earth because I was like coming back from feeding the cat. She's like... but I have never in my whole life before seen a bearded lady. Obviously, trans people exist, but this is not the kind of thing that I mean. I mean, old women, who've never done hormone therapy or anything, with full beards. But during the day that my son was being born, going back and forth on the bus, I saw 3 consecutive bearded women.
Really?
That's an important thing in Macbeth, right? Is the 3 witches, each of them has beards, and then there's some fairy stories where a princess will be born, and then they'll come and receive blessings from the Fae, and so 3 consecutive Fae will show up, and they'll each give a gift. And so I thought like, oh, this is just the craziest thing. And so I'm in the hospital for 3 or 4 days, sort of sleepless. The birthing process isn't going well. I'm reading the genealogy of morals for some reason between in whenever I have some downtime, and then every time I get on a bus, there's another bearded woman, and I felt that my child was being given gifts from the fairy realm. I have better stories, but none so kind of sort of stupid and amusing. Yeah, so yeah, you're right. Even when he starts describing the kinds of visions he's experiencing, I imagine him, at home in a meditative position, trying to get to silence and getting distracted by these visions of grandeur. But maybe this is just stuff maybe he's just high on methadone and just wandering the streets. Who knows? This annoys me so much here. Somewhere earlier in the paper he says, which won't be set down fully in this place, or... Oh,
I hate when...
is like, it's not appropriate to set it down in this place or something. It's like, why not? You're the one writing. Like, you make the decisions. Yeah. If you've never written about it before, more time will only dumb the memory further. Just sit down and write about it in this place. He says, what did he say? Only on Sundays am I... He uses such a stupid word. Impressed. Only on Sundays am I impressed to write a few fragments of what passes through my mind. It's like, don't wait to be impressed. Like, the Spirit doesn't have to press you in to doing the journaling that you're supposed to be doing. I think cultivate self-discipline.
You know? Yeah, it's like that's the way that he comes off a lot of the time, and it may be an unfair assessment, but it's hard to tell. The way that he comes off is just so self-important. I mean, just the fact that like in QBL, a book that he had written on the Kabbalah, he ends up going into the appendix, which is like diary writings, where he starts flipping the paths around on the Tree of Life and that sort of thing. And that's something that famously aggravated Crowley. But just the fact that he goes into diary stuff so quickly and easily, and even here it feels a little bit self-indulgent, where it's like he could explain things, but it's just sort of, I don't know, it just comes off as very self-indulgent a lot of the time.
Here's just a taste of kind of what I wanted to get to. It's a long paragraph, but I think if I read it, it'll sort of set me up for my hot take. And Frater Oivvio remained there, silent and still, till at last all seemed perfect even on the mental plane, for suddenly the English language seemed to rush back to the beginning, and reversed as Hebrew, which was written out the other way, and was given, and this was a great mystery. Then came the equilibrating of ideas. They rushed backwards and formulated themselves in the person of Adam, who appeared in the room opposite Oivvio, and then the first man and the last gazed at each other, as it were, in a final struggle, and the minute point of light grew ever brighter and more dazzling, and appeared concentrated upon the figure of Adam, first on the shoulder, then moving a little until finally settled over one eye, and at this point Frater Oivvio gazed, and then all rushed back again through the animal creation, each animal dissolving into its earlier type, until at last, as a prototype appeared, the common fly, only very large, perhaps 6 inches long. Then things stopped for a moment, as Frater Oivvio gazed at this, and then became the winged beetle, and then the scarab, and then the Egyptian crown, then only the point of light. And gradually he was able to bring this point nearer and nearer, until finally it neared his breast, and touching his breast, it was in his breast, and suddenly a new creation, and he reached out to the beginning and out to the old elements he had witnessed on the return to source, and from the new design the same material, but in different words of wonder. Who shall express the mystery in words? And this happened again and again. English, Hebrew, Greek, Egyptian, man, beast, bird were rearranged and recreated in new relationship to each other. And so he understood the mystery of change, and how the world is created again and again, forever new, yet forever the same. And the last word he realized, which was repeated in a certain way, seemed to bring about these changes again and again, as it were, alternating between nothingness and creation, was Al, and there was a certain gesture, not unlike the sign of the cross, which was connected with this miracle. And this, just in this one paragraph, he said, and I was silent and still about 4 times, and then each time immediately it explodes into some other sort of expansive cycling vision, and it feels like the material he's getting is like it's not worthless. But if you look at the way Crowley's fight with the demon sea goes, in the idea is that the abyss keeps firing ideas at you, and you have to try to avoid them, and in order to really settle in to the grade of 8-3 and become a master of the temple, you have to be able to realize that chasing these thoughts is not a productive activity. You've completely understood logical principles, reasonable principles. You've science. You understand how to cut up the world according to categories. But then to reconcile and become a master of the temple, what you need to do is become sort of trans-rational and exist in a sort of non-thinking state, which is what the Kabbalists call understanding in scare quotes. And this is why one of the titles of the Master of the Temple is the Master of Samadhi, because you need to be able to go to this silent place and stay there for quite a long time. And one imagines that really, if someone were a master of samadhi, they'd be able to make samadhi on all sorts of different objects fairly easily. And the way Crowley talks about in the Book of Light, Life, Love, and Liberty, how you make samadhi on death, you make samadhi on sex, you make and sort of destroy yourself gradually, piece by piece, in this way. And what Frater Achad here sees as the mystery of change, and he takes this to mean that he's a 9-2. Now this is 18 months after the initiation that made him claim Master of the Temple, but he's still doing it, and it would be nice to see that record to verify, because this looks like a failed attempt to cross the abyss. This looks like my hot take is that just based on this paper, without any recognizing that I have to find some diaries if they were existent, just based on this paper, Achad looks like a black brother. That he's tried to cross the abyss, but been fed all these little threads of information that he thinks are useful, and given up in favor of chasing what seems like information that the demon sea is feeding him. And this is why he can't he doesn't have the discipline to focus on any one idea. Crowley says, what's the mystery of sorrow? And he keeps obsessing over the mystery of change. And so he's told to write this pamphlet on the mystery of change. And instead of doing that, he does this nonsense, which will later, and the only thing that makes me question that is that good fruit comes out of it, right? Like he's a talented Kabbalist. And when we get to the next section of this, he'll be doing Kabbalah very well. And Crowley acknowledges his 8-3, and so
that's where you can make that argument about, like, was Crowley overlooking what was going on in order to, because he had his own desires of what he wanted to see out of this.
But then the black brother that becomes immortal and can do all sorts of magic. We're called this illusion, but like eventually destroys himself. Not really destroys himself, but like dissolves because they can't grab anything somehow. Anyway, there's a weird way in which Achad's biography sort of seems to suggest that.
Yeah, I get the sense that I've always gotten the sense that when you get to Tifereth. When you get beyond Tifereth, there seems to me to be a danger of the ego being very much a threat, and an increasing threat going forward. Because you'll have that sense of accomplishment, to feel like, there's always that danger of the sense of accomplishment, thinking, well, I've done that. Now I'm, you just basically, your ego can sneak up on you.
Well, before Tifereth, the ego is important, because we want to strengthen our self-identity and really know who we are, so that we can then be in relationship with the angel, right? The naive rationalist position of kind of like self not self dualism. By the time we get to Tifereth, all that not self is represented in the form of our holy guardian angel, and so we need to be strong to have a relationship with it. And we stay strong all the way up through the grades of our adepthood, and then when we renounce our adepthood, and try to accomplish that ego death, crossing the abyss, we spend all this time reinforcing, like discovering the self, learning the self, reinforcing the self, so that we can become strong enough to cross the abyss. But crossing the abyss is just the experience of abandoning all that work.
And you're hanging on to even so much as just the smallest
and if you seal up
dust.
you seal up one drop of blood in the body, everything goes to hell.
Yeah.
And maybe Achad did cross. Maybe Achad was a master of the temple for one day. And thought
I have
like,
a vision of that
and thought
droplet
like,
of blood
and thought like,
festering.
oh no, literally anything but this.
Yeah.
I can't not exist. That's just But I'm, that's that. I don't know. That's a pretty hot take, and I don't know how hard I stand behind it, especially now that I think we've, through conversation, pinned down the date of this to being this type of experience to being 18 months later than his initial crossing. It's okay to start having magus thoughts 18 months after your Master of the Temple experience. The only thing that makes me a little cautious is he says he started having them the very next day. So don't know.
It does seem a little bit like, well, you get, like I mentioned, I feel like, you get up there, and this is pure speculation, of course, but you get up there, maybe you do get a lot of sudden insight into the full supernal triad.
Sure. I mean, this is when you. I've had the experience not in the AA, but in some initiatory orders, of getting as far as like 2-9, and the fact that you now have an unobstructed view of Tefareth means something for your interpretation of the of the system. So, it seems like it's not totally off base for Achad to be having this information. Like, as he says, I understand, and he probably doesn't, but he says, I understand now the grade of Ipsissimus, but understanding is appropriate to the Master of the Temple, so I don't claim that I am Ipsissimus. Of course, if I did, that wouldn't be anybody's business anyway. Fucking monster.
I do like, incidentally, just as an unrelated aside, the fact that we have this L and Lo is almost like 0 and 1. It's like the universe is binary.
Yeah.
That's kind of a fun conception as well. And I always find that, when you're trying to understand the underlying, everything that underlies existence, it seems to ride that line where it could go either way. Could be, there could be nothing, could be God, but it never quite shows its hand.
Getting down into the next section, which begins Monday through Tuesday, October 17th and October 7th and 8th. We have him starting to use his new keyword, Loel, to interpret verses of Liber L. And this is very good. So I wonder if it's worthwhile just skipping to that so we could have the meat.
So he starts to relate Hadit to El, God, and Lo would be Nuit, nothing.
So, chapter 1, verse 45, the perfect and perfect are one perfect and not two, nay, are none. He says, here I think Nuit and Hadit are referred to as the perfect, for this is claimed by Hadit. See chapter 2, verse 15. If Nuit be considered as Lo and Hadit as El, this is at once clear, for they are one and yet none. It seems pretty basic to us, maybe, but if you were just reading for the first time, the perfect and perfect are one perfect and not two, nay, are none. Perfect and the perfect are one perfect is not too opaque, but nay, are none just is very confusing. But again, we're talking about reconciling these pairs of opposites into oblivion to create perfection. And this is if these are some of the first places that these insights are starting to happen, it's really cool. It's like it is a real result.
Yeah, I like the where in verse 21, where with the God and the adorer I am nothing. They do not see me. They are as upon the earth. I am heaven, and there is no other God than me and my Lord Hadit. And that also brings to mind one of the things he points out at some point that I think we've skipped over at this point, which is the idea that Chesed is also attributed to the god name El in the queen scale, I think.
Okay.
Or in the Bria, the Briatic world. And so that is also, Chesed is what all races of men call the first. Meaning, essentially, it's like the god and the adorer. They do not see me, for I am heaven, beyond that point of Chesed, up in the supernals, or even above the supernals. So,
yeah, and his interpretation of this verse is, now, if Hadit equals El equals God, then with him is Nuit Lo nothing. Also, this is so with the adorer, unless he concentrates on Hadit as the center is instructed. Yet this is also true, that there is no other God than me and my Lord Hadit. For looked at one way, God is Nuit, and the other is Hadit. They're playing these dual roles and can sort of switch into each other. There's maybe even something about the mystery of sex coming in here unspoken.
and yeah, God, Hadit being who hath worshipped Hurpar-Krat hath worshipped me. Nay, for I am the worshipper. So he is that ubiquitous point of view.
Oh, this is cute. Chapter 1, verse 40, note 3 grades. He who calls us Thelemites will do no wrong if he look but close into the word. For therein there are 3 grades, the hermit, the lover, and the man of earth. And here he says the 3 grades. Since making this note, I've had the opportunity of looking at the equinox for a moment and discovered that in Volume 7 comment, the tarot keys of the 3 grades add to 31, the hermit, the lover, and the man of earth. I'm not going to do mental math right now, but he says they add to 31, and I believe him, which I consider as a further proof that his own number is the correct key to the book. I may remark that I have been placed where I have no books. So maybe this is what you're talking about.
Yeah, this is the thing that I was referring to, that I was looking up and couldn't find exactly, or I couldn't decide exactly what he was referring to, if it was in number 7.
So this would be October 7th and 8th. Anyway, I must remark that I have been placed. Not that he is somewhere without his books because he sold them and did whatever, but that I have been placed where I had no books for reference, and am therefore fitting all these notes entirely from memory of my experience, which seems to make certain things clearer from day to day as I apply my attention to different aspects of the work.
Well, at least he's got pen and paper in the nut house.
Yeah, well, you'd want the crazies to do some journaling.
He's supposed to be drawing pictures with crayons, but he's journaling instead.
Oh, here I wrote it down. Verse 220, I am uplifted, it says. That's what I had for that. So what is where is I am uplifted? Oh yeah, of course. I think, if my math was right last night, that verse 122, which would be 61 times 2, should be I am uplifted in thine heart, and the kisses of the stars rain hard upon thy body.
That would be appropriate. Going with our the cobs is in the coup, not the coup in the cobs.
Mm-hmm. Let's take this verse again. 61, the Jews call it, I call it 880, 418, but they have the half. Twice is 62. Therefore, Allah, 62, which is 6 plus 2 equals 8 equals Heth equals 418 equals Parsifal equals the Fool equals Aleph equals one or none, and thus all disappear in one. Also, since Allah becomes all, has disappeared. Again, it is written, the fool hath said, in his heart there is no God, Loel, which again indicates the secret, I think Loel in this form is a secret name or word of Ra-Hor-Quit. See chapter 349. I am in a secret fourfold word, which is a blasphemy against all gods of men. Also, whereas Nuit and Hadith are ever united, the division becomes manifest in Ra Horquit. For as he says in chapter 3, verse 2, there is division hither homeward, there is a word not known. And I think there's a different sort of standard interpretation of what the secret fourfold word means, but I really like this because a blasphemy against all gods and men, no God is just like very, if you want to talk about an elegant solution, that's very, very direct.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
What was I going to say? I think I was just going to point out the fact that he says, and I think Lo El in this form is the secret name or word of Ra Horquit. He's got Hur in capitals because it's Hoor, sort of mirroring, I think this is what he's getting at, sort of mirroring the Laal.
Oh.
So we have a double vowel amidst two consonants.
So what would that be? That would be ayin, resh, hey. So 70 times 2 is 140, plus 200 is 345. Nothing jumping out at me.
Well, it makes me think of
3, 4, 5.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is from the D stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's the vision of the 4 palaces, and there's groups coming out of each of the palaces, and there's a big to-do made out of the numbers 3, 4, and 5. I think there's a lot of importance to those numbers and their permutations and whatnot. So.
Mm-hmm. And earlier he does do something where 31 divided becomes point, if you divide 1 by 3, it becomes 0.333333 repeating, mm-hmm. which shows why Kabbalistically the demon C, whose number is 333, how that is sort of like a byproduct of creation. There needs to be a mm-hmm. demon in the abyss. We can also understand it epistemologically because, in order to have a creation at all, you need stuff, and then chasing the stuff, it complicates the mind in a way that's unuseful for spiritual attainment. Mm-hmm. But having that number show that result just is evidence that number is useful. It's nice seeing gematria used for what gematria is supposed to be used for. Mm-hmm. I mean, so many people go on these tangents, these sort of what I would think like meaningless tangents. But gematria is a tool for scriptural interpretation. You're supposed to look at the Tanakh and connect verses using numbers, and so he's actually doing the activity of gematria correctly here. Not
using an online gematria calculator.
Which is how I do it.
Actually, that's one of the things that, just as an aside, that I think is kind of important. I do think it's important to be getting in the habit of doing your gematria in your head. Or working it out yourself. I'm putting together the Enochian stuff, and in doing so, one of the things that I'm doing is having to work out all the proportions for things to try and, get the sigillum, the stars correct, the shapes and whatnot, and same thing with the holy table, getting everything in proper proportion, and that's tricky. Well, at least for me anyway. I'm not like, skilled at mathematics and geometry and all that sort of thing. But the exercise of doing those things causes me to have to problem solve. And not only that, but I find it really internalizes so much of the geometry and the mathematics and stuff. And you've got it ringing out in your head while you're trying to get to sleep and all that sort of thing. So I think there's I don't think laziness is useful, basically. And I think there's a lot to be gained from, doing the work, like in that way as much as in any other way,
Well, I mean, if you can know the values and a little bit of basic addition, if you can do a simple mental arithmetic, it certainly helps you when you're doing visionary work, especially if you don't have a partner. Like if you have a scryer who can give you a word, and then you can quickly write it down and do some paper math without breaking the scryer's flow. But I've only ever worked by myself, and so I'll have to verify a spirit in my head, get some sounds, transcribe those sounds into Hebrew characters, translate those Hebrew characters into numbers, add up the numbers, and see if the number makes sense to me. Know enough of my correspondences to go, oh, that does or doesn't fit with this, the working that I'm trying to do. And then, of course, later on, I'll verify it and correct my mistakes for my diary. And often when I correct my mistakes, it explains things that I didn't understand in the vision. But if you can be dexterous enough to do that, which isn't, it takes longer to explain than it takes to do. Like mental arithmetic is hard for some people, but adding up a string of digits is something that people should be able to.
It's also a muscle,
do.
It's like there's that exercise that Crowley describes in Magick Without Tears, where you basically are going along the street and you're looking at red bricks, and red is Mars, and doing all the correspondences and that sort of thing. And you can do the same thing with numbers as well. But back to the paper.
Chapter 2, verse 15, for I am perfect being not, and my number is 9 by the fools, but with the just I am 8 and 1 in 8, which is vital, for I am none indeed. Hadith here clearly says he is not, or being not, a combination of wheat and hadith as the perfect and the perfect, which, it be remembered, are one, nay none. We have considered his particular aspect as L, or rather than low, but the previous verse indicates a blind. He is the shrine veiled by naught, for L is the manifestation of low, and low is the hiding of L. See the first verses of chapters 1 and 2. Had the manifestation of Nuit, knew the hiding of Hadith. He is 8 with the just, because they consider the balance of things, and so consider him as L low, which again gives us 62 equals 8 equals Hech equals 418 equals the fool equals Aleph equals none, as explained before in the answer to the riddle of Nuit. This one shows he is one Aleph in 8, and also none, quite clearly.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that little, he is 8 with the just, because they consider the balance of things. You can easily pass by that without registering the fact, okay, the just balance of things, we're talking about the justice card, which is 8 in the tarot as well.
Oh, I see. So that's where he's doing that.
Like, he's speeding through all this stuff, and it's not holding your hand at all. So I can see where, trying to read through this paper would be, you're not necessarily going to get everything on the first pass, It's not designed that way. Now comes the striking indication of an underlying formula in this book, which can be read in 2 ways, and the very same word is used to express this, only in the English instead of the Hebrew, which of course throws one off the scent of the mystery. And he refers to your favorite line. Is a God to live in a dog? No, but the highest are of us. Now, in English, God is dog if reversed, but the Hebrew for God is El, which reversed gives lo, which is not. One can hardly get away from the hint of the true nature of the key once it is pointed out, especially since it is followed by the negative no, another translation of lo, and a statement that the highest, or those who comprehend this mystery, are of us. And, it's another one of those cases that seems so obvious now when we have this stuff all in front of us. But at the time, it's like, as soon as it's pointed out, it's completely obvious.
I'm just looking to see what the Hebrew for dog is.
Yeah, I think I remember looking this up and not really getting too much interesting out of it, but...
Chelev. Kaf, which is 20, Lamed, which is 30, and Bith, which is 2. 52. So it'd be 52.
Well, that you add that together, you get 7. If you take God, I found this interesting. It's like the G, Gimel, would be 3, and the D, Daleth, would be 4, so you'd get 7 from that. And then with the O, you could take it as either Vow or Oyen. And so with Oyen, it ends up being 77 altogether, which is interesting because it's also, Oyen is the devil card, which is attributed to Capricorn, and 77 is Ez in Hebrew, which is a goat. That's kind of fun.
That is fun.
Then the Vav would be the Hierophant, incidentally. So
I'm kicking myself here because I feel like I'm missing something fairly obvious with that 52. It struck me as important, and I don't remember it. But if I just use this online gematria calculator, which you advised me against, 52 looks like it's the word image in Hebrew gematria.
That'd be super interesting if it's true, because
I who am but the image of an image say this or something.
And the reflection aspect again.
Yeah. Be not content with an image.
I who am
so
the image
God
of an
does
image.
not live in a dog. God does not live in a dog.
There you go.
I who am but the image of an image say this. Man, I hope that's not some weird suffix or something that makes it very idiosyncratic. But because that is kind of fun. Look here, this pisses me off. Chapter 3, verse 7.
Are you quoting him right now? Or?
Yeah. Look here, this pisses me off. Verse 76 of the 3rd chapter. Achad says, I don't make this out yet, but it seems to indicate that it will not come till later, after the prophet's time. Anyway, El appears twice among the letters.
Oh, that's the 2nd chapter.
That's
you mean to say, yeah.
Oh, the 2nd chapter, yeah. So this is the long cipher, which Crowley specifically says Achad's key songs. And Achad says he doesn't make it out. We're just never gonna find the paper where it says what that means.
Yeah.
This is our 4th try to find the paper where it says what that means.
I mean, thou shalt never know.
People on the internet think they know.
Yeah.
Where the hell are they getting it from? I should ask the internet.
Oh, I've heard so many takes on this. In fact, I've seen one person was saying that it was thou shalt never know means that there's actually nothing to solve, or there was a dismissive kind of, approach to it.
That's very helpful, thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the thing. You can take whatever stance you want, and certainly people on the internet like to state the facts and move on without any explanation or anything like that. They just assume that they're right. But anyway, let's continue stating the facts here, and then we'll move on and assume that we're right. The half of the word of Heru-Ra-Ha probably indicates some mystery in this division as indicated in verse 2. This is in the chapter 3 at this point. And that's the division hither homeward that he's referring to, indicated in verse 2. I think thus far he has been low, meaning Rahu or Kuit in this case. For in verse 35 we have him worshipped as El, or God. So, I mean, it's a little hard to unpack that and get anything clear on that, but he's saying that there's reference to unity, uttermost showed the might of thy breath, and that sort of thing, as somehow unity meaning being important and breath being important, and uttermost. So it's a little unclear what he's getting at there, but I guess he's not going for clarity, he's going for just making notes.
Well, I think what he means is that is that this chapter has 2 sections, and before verse 35 you're dealing with the low aspect of Heru-Ra-Ha, and then starting in verse 35, you're through to the end of the chapter, you're dealing with the Ale aspect of Heru-Ra-Ha. And so we'd have to reread the chapter thinking of that to know whether or not we thought that was a valuable interpretation. And even, what you would get out of that interpretation, I'm unclear on at this point, right?
Yeah, I think there was something else in here that was referring to We have a return of the dog with damned for a dog. Enough of because be he damned for a dog, the reverse of God again, in its wrong aspect.
Well, that's not bad, because this is what we were talking about in terms of crossing the abyss, right?
Mm-hmm.
Down here in the material world, we can do all these becauses and all the Enlightenment stuff about, rediscovering Aristotelian logical principles and the idea that reason will solve all our problems. There's validity to that in the material world, but as soon as you but if you try to cross the abyss using those logical tools, then you fail to understand reality as you approach it, and so whether it's right or not, it's interesting, because the idea of a dog being a sort of failed God or reversed God and not God. So you have low in the Ein Sof, obviously, but maybe you also have a low this side of the abyss, where because is also sort of a type of not, with the God being in the middle between the abyss and the
I was watching,
creation.
I was listening to a podcast from a mathematician scientist talking about this idea that everything that whether or not our brains are capable of comprehending any kind of truth, or being able to sense any kind of truth, like anything that we sense, which is not very groundbreaking from our perspective, from a spiritual perspective, because that's a very common, truism. But it's for what he's talking about is the idea that all of our consciousness would be evolutionarily based on survival and that sort of thing, and the odds mathematically of them actually giving us any actual sense of truth are exactly zero, according to the math that they've been doing. So the idea being that if we, we're going to come up against a wall at some point, and I think his theory is that we're pretty much coming up against it pretty much, presently, in terms of like how much farther we can push, because we're only looking at things based on the way that our consciousness works. And so being able to look beyond that and recognize that space-time is only a product of our consciousness, and if we look at things outside of space-time, then other things start to make more sense and add up. It's kind of an interesting subject that aligns with some of what we're talking about here.
My brother was studying pure math for a while at, I think, of Waterloo. There aren't very many places that offer pure math. It's kind of a difficult subject. But I showed him some of the equations in the paper Bereshit, not a note on Genesis, but a note in
on ontology.
And
Everybody together now.
Not only did he say this is nonsense, but he was offended at the idea that anything in metaphysics could be used to describe material, like things about the material world, which is weird, because that's sort of what mathematics is for. We derive mathematics from understanding of the material world. Like if we have two oranges, then we get to the idea of two-ness.
Kant talks about this, the idea that it's like a synthetic
it was
a priori.
It was a very Kantian thing of him to say that the metaphysics doesn't actually approach the reality of things, and so for Crowley to have these mathematical equations that proved nothing inevitably becomes infinite creation or something, or finite creation, it like offended Stephen to say that like anything metaphysical, vis-a-vis pure math, could be an explanation for fundamental things about our reality. He just thought that was nuts and borderline offensive. So which just kind of blew my mind. And at the time I now get it, but at the time I didn't realize how mathematics counted as a sort of metaphysics. But it's a layer of interpretation you put over all of reality, so other things kind of fall.
Yeah, that's a whole other subject. But I mean, I've listened to people try to explain how the universe actually is math, is based on math, and it's like trying to make a one-to-one comparison, and I can't wrap my head around how they can do that aside from just buying into their own conceptions of things. But that's kind of a whole different tangent, and it's a little bit, yeah, maybe.
Maybe for later.
Yeah.
Chapter 2, verse 26.
Yeah, one convoluted mess at a time.
I am the secret serpent, wisdom of the world coiled about to spring. If I lift up my head, I and my nuit are one. If I droop down my head and shoot forth venom, there is rapture of the earth, and I and my earth are one. And Achad says, gives another proof of the peculiar dual aspect of the world. It will be noticed that Nuit has said that the god and the adorer are upon the earth, as God Hadit is one with the earth, and as not, and he is one with Nuit. Also Hadit is called her secret center and the world, and her heart and her tongue. And the house or home of Hadit makes the spoken word possible. The thing that I wanted to say about this, right, is that there's a section in Genesis, in Bereshit, where one of the punishments for the woman and the serpent before they're is that the woman will always wound the serpent on the head, as the serpent will always wound the woman on the heel. But in the original Hebrew, it's a little bit ambiguous. So you might just as easily translate it as the serpent will wound the woman on the head and the woman will wound the serpent on the heel, which is weird because the serpent's just had its legs taken away, so it can't reach the head and has no heel. But then later in the Revelation, the dragon is called that old snake, relating him to the... And this thing about droop down my head and shoot forth venom, Mary falls from heaven pregnant with Jesus. She runs into the wood. The dragon falls from heaven and chases her and lowers down his head and shoots forth venom. There's an earthquake. The earth opens up to receive the venom and protect the baby Jesus as he's being born. So all the venom that was intended to go to Mary and Jesus falls into the earth. I guess impregnating it, because that's fairly shortly before the false, is it the false prophet that rises from the sea? Mm-hmm. Anyway, there's complicated biblical things going on here, and Achad says gives us another proof of the peculiar dual aspect of the world. It will be noticed that Nuit has said that God and the adorer are upon the earth. God and the adorer are upon the earth. Mary and Christ have fallen, have just fallen to earth. As God, Hadit is one with the earth, as not, and he is one with Nuit. Also, Hadit has called her secret center the world, and her heart and tongue. The house or home of Hadit makes this spoken world possible. So this sort of the churning image of the relationship between Lo and El, and the pregnant earth, and that's leading creation towards its kind of final dramatic climax, which also includes a venom spitting serpent, erotically. It's and there's and that erotic insemination of the earth takes place during the second birth of Christ, and there's this whole fuck ton going on there.
I think he also relates that whole image of Hadith, the serpent, the head. If I lift up mine head, I and my nuit are one. You could picture the serpent head kind of being around the abyss where it's crossing up to Nuit and then drooping down to the earth, and the venom pouring out is all the bullshit that we distract ourselves with that we call consciousness.
Consciousness. So far in the last year, we've had Malkuth, all of creation, as a dingleberry on the ass of God, and now we have all of human consciousness as the bullshit we distract ourselves with. I am not sure that we are, going forth conquering and to conquer like the first horseman in the way we should be. I think maybe we're secret Buddhists trying to destroy ourselves. A lot of nihilism on this podcast this month.
Yeah, fair enough.
Let's move on. There's two epilogues here. One that takes place on Friday, October 11th, and one that takes place on the October 16th. So I'm just going to read an excerpt from the first of these epilogues. I spent last evening with Therion. During our conversation, he said that he thought Nuit and Hedit were best expressed as matter in motion. He also said that all things must be considered as 0 and 2, as if one were arrived at, there was no getting away from it. I pointed out that there must be some formula combining 0 and 1, or the tree of life could never have been conceived of as formulated. He admitted this, but said so far he has failed at such. And so I think this is the kind of inception of Lochtal. That Crowley's 0 equals 2, 0 equals 2, 0 equals 2 can never get back to 1. He sort of thinks monism is unworkable. There's either nothing or two things. There's no it's all matter is one. Of course there's no that sort of stuff, but Achad convinces him that there needs to be some transitionary principle. He describes it as a formula combining 0 and 1 so that the tree of life can get incepted. And so all the stuff we did last month about SHT is coming. Mm-hmm. When I got to bed, I could not sleep, and a number of other things connected with this mystery came to me. One was the significance of the fact that when AC first got in touch with the brothers of the AA, the password was, "There is no God." This seems to confirm the word as the central secret of AA. AA, who also gives out the new law. Thought it was important to read that since you'd read the other thing before the break. There's this section about why A followed by L and not A followed by Tav. And it's because...
saying the word Aleph, the first word, or the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, in saying that first, you've already got AL right there.
And then with the addition of the Pei, shows the necessity of sort of destruction and change again.
And the use of the mouth for speech, because it's a mouth.
Mm-hmm. Again, this remember that this whole piece that's sort of biographical, it was written in response to Crowley's request for a short pamphlet on the mystery of change. One wonders if Crowley was perhaps testing to see if he actually. It's like, well, if you think you're a 9-2, can I please have a short pamphlet on the mystery of change? And Achad responded by just vomiting.
Yeah.
And then the second epilogue I actually don't want to do because I don't understand it. Because it's this whole thing. There's Tav is the Tau cross, Yod is the center and essence, Beth is the magician, Pei is the flash, I don't understand to what end. I don't know where he's getting these letters from.
Yeah, he's just putting these letters together to describe the vision that he had, where it was like retracting to the beginning of the universe and then expanding back out with a new creation. And I think what he's trying to get at is that this is like an ongoing process of annihilation and recreation. But it's really intensely meaningful to him. But it's, I mean, this is the nature of the paper in general, I suppose. It's like you take what meaning you can from it in a lot of ways, aside from some of the obvious code cracking that's been going on.
Yeah. So if you're being a historian, you need to have looked at this and then seen, okay, well, there's other documents being pointed at. Let's see if the diary entries from 1916 are still extant. Let's see if any of this correspondence where Crowley says, thou knowest your key opens the palace, or the other correspondence around Achad being being accepted as a master of a temple and a magical child for Crowley. See what other documentation continues to exist so that we can flesh out this story a little more. But the kind of work that we've been doing in the last 3 months, as amateurs, as I guess amateur historians of Thelema at this point, but kind of accidentally by virtue of doing this podcast that we've been doing, how long it takes to draw any kind of conclusion, and how and the degree to which you need to show your work by digging into the source material that exists and trying to figure out what it means. And we've been going very surface. This is all published stuff. You could try to find letters. You could talk to surviving relatives. You could talk to the OTO and see if you could get in their archives. A not amateur historian could do so much more. So just when you're reading, introductions to newly published Crowley works by people who are supposed to be academics, and they just say things. If I say something 3 times, it's the truth. I don't need any sources at all. Compare this to compare the work of the real, in scare quotes, academics working on Thelema to the actual work of history that you and I are accidentally doing on this podcast, and see whether or not you can buy any of it.
Yeah, I think you can always tell when somebody just states, this is the way things went, or this is the information we have. I think it's obvious that this is the way things went. And where there's just a very clear agenda happening, and it's not always easy to sense what that is, but you put that against something where, okay, we can at least leave it open to interpretation and recognize that we're going to have colored. We're going to look at Achad as the other side if we're siding with Crowley. That's going to color our interpretation of this text. It's going to color our interpretation of anything that we're approaching of Achad. And so if we can recognize that and be honest about it, then we have a better chance of approaching it a little bit more cleanly, where we can at least look at it from a couple of different angles.
This actually made me much more sympathetic to him than I initially was. I mean, I thought that I was going to be getting sick of doing this gematria stuff, because we've done it about 3 months in a row now. But I'm actually enjoying chasing the development of this story of the interpretation of our scripture, and the way the profundity of what Achad's able to give Crowley in terms of scriptural interpretation. Like, I just kind of thought it was going to be maybe the solution to one cipher, or some little clue but it really does seem to open up the whole book in terms of where it fits on the tree of life. Now, what you can derive from that in terms of practice, like what that means for your meditation practice, what that means for your moral code, what that means for political and philosophical interpretation. I still have to do more thinking about it before I decide whether that's really as profound as it seems like it is, but the fact that the numbers plug in as many places as they seem to is really cool.
I think that's completely the issue at hand, too, is that, you can have these startling revelations, but then what? What's the meaning? What use is it? And that is the next step. So, just going back to the idea of having like crazy shit happening to you in your life and taking it as an initiation and all this sort of thing. Okay, wonderful. Then what?
It seems like the main point for Achad is, 1, the proof that I'm your magical child. 2, if I'm having these insights appropriate to Kether, doesn't that mean I'm a 10-1? And so he's just trying to evidence his own attainment rather than to say something we can take away from in terms of an understanding of the book. Even though he's saying he's laying out the mystery of change for those that come after, that's just proof that he's the Buddha of compassion. It doesn't actually help those that come after. Or maybe because, do we already have better stuff than Crowley? Maybe the stuff Crowley writes about this stuff comes later than 1918.
Yeah, a lot of
Crowley's
the stuff
most
was
lucid stuff about meditation and even though he already has 0 equals 2, maybe Liber LLL that we read is later than this. And
the Cephalou period is where a lot of his commentaries were being written and a lot of his ideas were being crystallized.
And it seems like he's in communication with Achad through
that's had a huge influence
early, just before and then through some of the Cephalou period. So.
Yeah. So it has had a huge impact, and it's easy to overlook that impact just by virtue of the fact that it's become so ingrained in the body of work.
So I can't decide what to do next. We had talked about doing the anatomy of the body of God, and if people want want us to keep chasing this thread, then I am still happy to do the anatomy of the body of God, but I am worried that we are getting really opaque. And so we'll still do anatomy of the body of God, but if anyone wants to leave us a Facebook a YouTube comment or something and say, please do a chapter of something Magick without tears or something that I can actually understand. I guess we'll have recorded our next episode before, but let us know what you want us to what you want us to release next instead of because we can pull this Achad thread right through to the end of season 2 if you want, but I think it's better for us to know how people are receiving these.
Yeah, and it'd be nice to get comments that are more interesting and thought-provoking than just sort of dismissive insults or.
Are we getting a lot of those?
No, we're not getting a lot of comments, generally speaking. We've gotten some compliments. We've gotten some genuine compliments. Those are great, but they don't necessarily lead to further discourse.
No.
And the other kinds of compliments that we've gotten also don't tend to lead to further discourse, which is kind of, either nonsense that I can't quite make heads or tails out of. Maybe they're speaking from above the abyss and I just can't put it together. But the other is just dismissive insults, which is all I can describe it as, because it's the kind of thing that's not backing itself up with anything deeper. It's just saying, you guys don't know what you're talking about, or something like that, and then not saying anything else.
I would love to do some talkback episodes where we just read the dismissive insults.
Yeah. I was thinking about doing that tonight, actually.
So I think it would be more fun than reading positive feedback.
Yeah.
The problem is that if we do that, it encourages the proliferation of dismissive insults, which would also be okay, except that I think pushes us down in the algorithm. Yeah. If we start encouraging people to downvote us, then then our visibility is reduced. So while I appreciate your negative comments and would love to see more of them, I don't think it's actually feasible for us to start encouraging that too actively.
Yeah, I think frankly I just don't care. Honestly, we're doing this because we get something out of doing this. We feel good about doing this. It's for us, and it's for anyone else who enjoys this and can get something out of it. And I want to see, I can only speak for myself, but I want to see, just more talking about this subject matter and more getting the general culture of Thelema out there.
How about if we're going to invite people to leave more comments, like we're supposed to, because it's, that's what we do on the internet, is invite people to...
I wanted to avoid the whole, please like and subscribe.
Oh, Christ.
Darkly Splendid Abodes.
You don't need us, we don't need you.
The method of science, the aim of religion.
Don't do yoga.
And that sums up what this podcast sets out to explore.
I'm trying to do it without sounding like, yeah, man, it just calms me down and I feel more focused.
Featuring discussions on the practices of magic and mysticism.
It's way harder to live life doing practice than not doing practice.
We'll set out to explore the nature and powers of the mind, as well as what lies beyond its limits.
Quit Thelema, stop listening to us. It's not for you.
Yeah, how about we invite comments from people who've actually been inspired to read this and have something to say about it?
Yeah, you know what? Read the thing and see what you get out of it, and see if there's, if you want to meditate on it a little bit. Is there stuff that you can pull from it?
Yeah, tell us what we missed.
Yeah, tell us about the piece. Don't tell us about the podcast. That might be a good way to go. You can tell us about the podcast, too, but...
Thanks, Darren.
Thank you, Michael.
Love is the law, love under will.
Love is the law, love under will. Thank you for joining us. Look for Toronto Thelema on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Watch for events in the city. And join us again in the Darkly Splendid Abodes. So I'm going to grab that from over your shoulder there.
Oh, this will be creepy.
Excuse me. So, how you doing?
Good grief.
And through the magic of editing,